Last week, my guest was Sahar Paz, and we talked about using our voices to make the changes we want to see in the world. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode, I encourage you to go back. But before you do, I'd encourage you to listen to this episode with my friend Reema Sukumaran, sharing her story, her memoir. I'd like to say that we talk about topics that may be triggering for some. And so, if you are triggered by talk of rape or mental illness, please be advised. Welcome to Diversity Dish, where we're dishing on everything diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice related. My name is Sedruola Maruska, and we're bridging the gap between what needs to be said and what needs to be heard. Those individual experiences that are often ignored or simply dismissed. Sometimes I'm dining alone, sometimes I'm dining with friends, and sometimes I'm dining a la carte. No matter how I'm dining, it promises to be delicious. Let's dig in. Reema Sukumaran is wife to an amazing husband and mother to 6 beautiful, crazy, busy sons. She's a speaker and a trainer whose goal is to bring light to the topic of clergy abuse, often thought to be taboo. She speaks openly to leaders about recognizing symptoms of unhealthy boundaries, burnout, and focuses on self-care and respect. Her memoir, Beautifully Broken, was recently released. She is on an exciting journey of using her pain and heartache to find healing and wholeness. Hi, Reema. It is so good to see you.
Hey, Sadie. It's so great to see you too.
I'm so happy you said yes to being on the podcast because I'm really excited about your book.
I'm so grateful you asked me. Thank you. I'm excited about my book too.
Yeah, so Beautifully Broken. I'm going to be linking it down in the show notes and I'm going to make sure that everybody knows how to find you. But before we get into all of that, I want to start with a question just so that people can get to know you a little bit better. And so that question is, what are you really, really passionate about right now?
There's so many things I'm passionate about. I mean, my biggest passion is my family. I'm a mom of 6 boys. So life revolves around them and my husband. And so I'm very passionate about them. But my second passion is my book. It's my baby. It's, been a long time in the making. And I'm really passionate to share my story because I think there's so many people that can resonate with it and share my story. And I really believe I'm a voice for people that can't speak out.
I'm so excited to hear you say that because I feel that we all have that. We all have things that happen to us and they're not meant to happen just to us, but to help us share stories with other people that might help them to get through whatever it is that they're getting through. And so I'm so proud of you. I don't know. I don't think I mentioned that that you and I have been friends since high school. I mean, not high school, college.
University, yeah.
Yes, we met each other at university. And then we reconnected on Facebook. And so that's been, I don't know if we even want to say how many years ago.
Well, it's been I don't know, 86, I think, or 87. 1987, I think, was our freshman year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. 86, 87 was freshman year. Yep. That's right.
Wow.
Woo! Okay. See, 80s, 90s, knots. That's like 30 already.
Oh my goodness. That seems so crazy.
I know. So let's get into talking about your book, Beautifully Broken. I read your book in 2 days because first of all, it's really something when you're reading a book about someone that you know or that you've been around, and then you're reading things and you're going, oh my God, had no idea, you know?
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then you think back on how you treated that person or something, and you go, gosh, I'm so glad I treated them nice, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because
Yes.
and
Yes.
which reinforces the idea of you just never know what someone is going through, and
Mhm.
so you should be cognizant of that, you know.
Yeah. Very much
um
so.
but why don't you give us a quick, well, before you do that, what inspired you or what compelled you to even write a book?
So my book I started writing probably 26 years ago. So actually right after I got married. And it's been an interesting journey because I think initially when I was writing, I don't know that I was necessarily writing a book as much as venting. I had a lot of anger. And, I didn't realize truthfully that it was even anger. I was just venting because I've always journaled, I've always written. That's just my way of releasing. And, I had a lot of frustration with my mom, with our relationship. And a lot of times you can't say that kind of stuff. I wouldn't have said it to my mom because I would never have wanted to hurt her. And so, I just started writing. And it's interesting because my book has had so many different versions or edits of them. I think I must have written my book probably maybe 10 different times. And each time the story evolves, and once you have kids, your perspective changes. Once you have teenagers, it changes. So, it was just interesting. And then, my mom and our relationship evolved as I matured, as I was able to maybe feel empathy for her instead of anger. And, it's been really interesting because my book had to be written when it was written because my mom's death allowed me freedom to truly be honest and actually be a voice for her and me, which I don't think I could have done with her being alive because I was so worried about how she would feel.
Right. And you're first generation, right? Correct? First generation Canadian?
No, so I actually was born in India.
Yes,
So,
so you were okay.
so yeah, but I came when I was 2, so pretty much, I'm about as
Right. So
Canadian as you can get. Yeah.
right. But also being a first generation Haitian American, so my parents were born in Haiti, I understand that
Mm-hmm.
trepidation to say certain things to your or with your parents around because of the just because of culture,
Yeah.
culturally,
Yeah.
and also how are they going to feel about it personally, and you would never want to do that, so I totally get that.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't want to rush to the end back of the book, so I'm not even going to go there.
Okay. Okay.
But I want you to, if you could, give us a quick synopsis of the book. And then
Okay.
I want to kind of get into a few other questions that I have. But go ahead, get into a quick
Okay.
synopsis.
Okay. So basically, the basis of my book is that my mom, my 2 siblings, and I lived with abuse. My mom was a battered woman. And as children, we lived in fear of my dad's explosive nature. We didn't know what would set him off. He obviously had good sides to him, but fear was what we lived with constantly. And later on, after I left home, I always looked up to role models, like to men as role models, because my dad wasn't something I wanted. And so I would look at pastors, teachers, friends, dads as something that I wish, my dad was. And I trusted them. And I ended up trusting one of our pastors and was raped by him. And, my story kind of goes from there, and how much abuse defines who you are in a good way and in a bad way. You kind of have to work through that. And then my story is also about my happily ever after, meeting my husband and just how we journeyed through that to today, how we got to the point. My book also talks a little bit about my mental health and how, most people don't go through struggles without it affecting them in some way. And for me, it all kind of came to a head, and it was a real, I don't even know the word to use, but it was just a very scary time for our family, with me really struggling mentally, and how we've kind of come through that, and realizing that mental health is something we need to talk about. So my book talks about issues that I think most people don't speak about. My mom, she shared only once about being abused, and that person shut her down, and she never spoke about it again. So we live with this abuse that nobody knew about, or people knew and shut their eyes to. It's a generational thing too, I think. But yes, my book is really about being a voice to people, and to say, most of us are all broken somehow. And with patience and love and support and counseling, there's so many ways that we can still have a whole life by being gentle with ourselves.
Right. Being gentle with ourselves. Absolutely. Yeah. So I read your book, and, I was reading it, and I was like, there were times where I was horrified, and there were times where I was just sad. And then there were times where, I smiled and laughed through. I mean, you wrote things in a funny way, even if they were kind of sometimes a little bit, embarrassing, but you wrote them in a funny way. And I would be like, oh my God, I could so see it. Like, it's very visual in my head.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that came up for me, especially, is because you wrote about feeling that people might have known that something was going on, but no one ever stepped forth to say anything. And I also know that the community that you were in is predominantly white. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I want to know if you feel, or if you think that maybe that might have had something to do with the fact that you were being left to your own devices, so to speak.
So the community that I lived in, yes, was predominantly white, but it was also very upper middle class, what am I saying? Upper middle class.
Upper middle class.
Middle class. Yeah. And, there were minorities, but they were also upper middle class. And so they had the respect of the community. And I really feel like, we were poor. My dad was just this creature, this character from somewhere else, and he had no shame. So, he was very eccentric and very obnoxious to some degree, and so yes, I do feel that way. I feel like I know, like, for example, our principal definitely knew, because things happen, and I would actually go to him. Like, for example, one time my youngest brother had done something, and he was suspended, and I went to the principal and I said, look, can he have an in-school suspension, because if my dad finds out, he's going to beat us, right? So it wasn't a secret. I mean, obviously, here's a teenager coming to the principal saying, looking out for my brother. So yes, I do believe that people knew. I hesitate to say it was prejudice, though. I think there was parts of that. I think it had more to do with my dad, and our that we were poor, so we weren't in the status where a lot of people, like, we weren't in that bubble, I guess is the best way to say it.
Right. So maybe it could have been more of a socioeconomic prejudice versus a racial prejudice, right?
Yes.
More than a social prejudice.
Like, not coming to me.
Yeah. Oh, girl, I understand. Trust me. We of a certain age, that happens quite often. So it's possible that it was more of that and less race related, but more socioeconomically economic. So people just assumed that because you were poor, that's just your life, or that's just how it was, right?
Now, after saying that, I have to say there was some prejudice, because now I'm thinking of a mutual friend of ours, Linda, whose parents had money and were in that bubble, but she still felt racism too, So yeah, I would say that it did play a part. I'm kind of thinking as we're talking about it. So, but again, there was like there was maybe 3 or 4 minorities in my school,
Right.
families, you know.
Right.
So sure, I think that now that you say that, and I'm thinking it through, that yes, I think it was a few factors that played into that.
Right. And so kind of just left you by the wayside, which is,
Yeah,
so sad.
yeah,
But then you had this pastor violate you,
mm-hmm.
rape you, and then continue to be part of the society.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, and he was white,
No,
right?
he wasn't.
He wasn't. What
He
was he?
wasn't. No, he was black.
He was a black pastor.
Yes,
He, but he continued to be part of this society, right?
yes,
And was able to make it seem as if you were you had a few screws loose, like you were making this all up
that's
in your
right.
head, right?
Yeah. But see,
How
I
it,
think that he. Sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that the reason why pastor was accepted is because, I mean, he was white, so to speak, in in the way he presented himself, and he brought money into the school. Like it was his gregariousness, it was his ability to draw students in. Like he was teaching for the school.
Right.
And so he was able to get away with stuff like the administration kind of looked the other way because they wanted him there,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So
Because he was bringing in money and you guys were poor. So
right,
weigh your
yeah,
options. It's just,
exactly, exactly.
right?
Yep.
That is so, it's it's so unfortunate, you know, when you did come out with your story, when you were finally able, strong, and when you found the strength to come out with your story. How did that work out? I know, I think you talk about it in the book, but I'd like for you to just say it out loud for the
Okay.
podcast.
I mean, right after the rape, I mean, I was very angry, and
Yeah.
immediately I thought to call the police. But if you read my story, you'll realize why I did not,
Yes.
because they weren't really there for us. But it was probably 2 years later, I believe, after the rape, that I was engaged. My now husband and I were going through the premarital counseling, and it was coming obviously between us, in the sense that I wanted it to just go away, and Sanj wanted to really hurt this person, and we didn't know exactly how to handle it. And so we shared it with our counselor, and he had said to me, Reema, you can't
Gloss
just let
over
this
it.
go away. Exactly. And he was the first person that said, I will help you if you're willing to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am surprised, to be honest, looking at the younger me, how much strength I actually really did have. Because I do believe that had someone stood up and said, I'll help you, even that in that time of my rape, I think that I would have stood up and done something. So that strength that the younger me had always surprises me a bit, because I was like my mom. I was fearful and coward with anger, or bottled things up. But I was also, it made me mad to think that somebody else could go through this. And
Right.
so
Right.
that is what allowed me to speak up. And then our counselor said to me what he wanted me to do, which was tape recorder conversations with my rapist. That was one of the scariest things I've ever done,
Oh my
And
God.
well,
Yeah.
it's back 26 years, no, even longer than that, 28 years. So we have the big tape recorder, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
landline, and you're like putting the landline to the tape recorder, you're pressing record, and you
Yeah.
have to hope it's recording, right? You don't want it to hear the sound. And oh my goodness, it was crazy, right? And I was petrified. And
Yeah.
yet, I mean, I personally think God gave me the courage to do that. He gave me the
Yeah.
courage through my whole story,
Right.
from beginning as a little girl to survive. And so I recorded him. And in the recording, I said to him that you took my virginity away without my consent. I
Mm-hmm.
wish I could have said you raped me, but I was too scared to say that with him
Right.
on the
Right.
phone. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I did, before this, I did confront him a couple of other times. One through a letter that I was really angry about, and I did tell him he raped me in that letter. But anyways, the phone conversation was recorded for him to admit. Well, actually, he didn't deny it. So he didn't say, yes, I raped you, but he didn't deny it. And I had a lot of conversation about how I felt and how he betrayed me. And so we took that tape recording to the principal.
Right.
And, initially he denied it, but when we said there was a tape, then he asked what we wanted. So we kind of went from there.
Right. And the principal, what did the principal do?
The principal was one of his best friends. So, it was, it still maddens me to think about it, but the principal did what he had to do, which was basically he went to my rapist and said, the two things I want is one for you to turn in your ministerial license.
Yeah.
And two, to not have, to not be in a position with young people. Well, he did the stuff through action, but my rapist was allowed to write the school community a letter.
Right.
And in the letter, he basically said that around this time, his mom had died and a young lady came into his life and took advantage of him. And because of that, he was, he was paying the consequence of what happened, So it was unreal,
Right.
But
blame the victim.
Exactly.
Wow. You talk about how the principal was really good friends with this pastor, and it brings up this subject or this idea to me of how many men are out there that rape women and their friends know about it but never say anything about it. It's staggering to me because you think to yourself, is it really possible that all the men that we know don't know anyone who's ever raped anyone or who's ever taken advantage of a person for, whatever reason or however they felt they could, and they're protected?
Yeah. 1 out of 3 women are sexually abused or assaulted. 1 out of 3. And I think it's 1 out of 5 or 6 men are, and part of me, my heart breaks for the men because most men don't come out with it, and it affects them in a big way. There are a lot of women don't come out with it too, but the way I look at it is, if you really love someone or care about someone, why wouldn't you hold them accountable or help them?
Right.
You have a problem, bro. Let me help you with this, or, and, I think the biggest thing that I struggled with my rape and with the community is that had I been somebody's daughter, don't tell me that they would not have done something.
Right.
Had I been white, don't tell me they
Right.
would have not done something. Had my dad been a doctor or a pastor or, in leadership, of course,
Yeah.
And it wasn't
Right.
just the principal; it was administration in the church
Right.
that turned their eye too. So
Right.
and it wasn't just at that point. It was after I got married that I still tried to do something within the church and say, hey, we have a problem. But that got shut down. That was still an era where we still just made everything go away, or we moved people to a different state,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
we moved our
Where it was
problem.
right. We remove it from here so that you don't see it, but then someone else can report it somewhere else, and then we can move them again, and then they won't see it. Very hush hush. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about mental health, because that right now, I think a lot of people are realizing how important it is, how we all need to be taking care of our mental health, and how we have things that affect us that we don't necessarily think affect us, but they do. Like, they may not be a rape per se, or an assault or something like that, but there are a lot of things in our communities and such that affect us. And so what are your thoughts, or what is your counsel to those who are experiencing things but are not seeking counseling or taking care of their mental health?
I was talking to my therapist actually yesterday, and I think one of the biggest things is that counseling isn't accessible to everybody. It's expensive. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest drawbacks with our both our countries, Canada and the US and North America. If counseling was available, I think it would just make such a huge difference in our society. And
Yeah.
for me, you know, we have coverage, but it was $500. And, as a young family, that wasn't really an option. I would go to counseling and then the $500 was done in like what, 3 sessions or something.
Right.
And, it takes time to build trust with a counselor. It takes time to explain your story,
Mhm.
and so for me, I didn't go to counseling for a very long, well, since probably just 4 years ago. It's such a huge part of um, like mental health. I don't think everyone realizes how much so many people struggle. We
Yeah.
might not even realize it's a mental health issue. For me, it started as postpartum,
Mhm.
with my kids. And eventually it kind of moved on from there. Like postpartum didn't go away, it became depression and then it became something else. And for me, I mean, I'm not obviously qualified to make this statement, but I really believe for me, all my trauma eventually came to head. And my body just was, I can't do this anymore,
Right.
because I had to be strong. I was strong for my mom, I was strong for my brothers. Then I had a family, have a family.
Mhm.
And as moms, especially, we don't get a break. We don't take a break, or we feel
Mm.
guilty for taking a break.
Mhm.
And my body, I think, just was done. It
Right.
just, it just stopped.
Right.
And what I mean by that is just my mental health, just my body rebelled, and I ended up having a seizure,
Right.
as one of
I
the
was
things
gonna
that
say, just
happened.
yeah, give us a little bit of tell us a little bit about how your body rebelled against you.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So initially, at some point, I started having, like, I would be driving and I would see something playing out in my head, a scenario, and it scared me. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, like, how am I explaining what happened? And then it would, fade away, and so I could still drive or do whatever, but once I came out of it, I couldn't explain it. Like
Mm.
I couldn't tell you what it was about. It was just something. And yet when I would go back into that, it kind of took off where it left off, kind of thing. And I ended up
Mm.
going to my doctor, and I was petrified to tell him because I was sure he was going to lock me up. And he was just like, "Oh, that's depersonalization." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he, like, for me, it's so important to talk to your doctor because what you think might be crazy,
Yeah.
there's so many people struggling with the same thing. Like, he made it sound like, oh, you have the flu, you know? And so
Right.
it's something that so many people apparently struggle with. And so
Can
for
you
me,
explain that for us just a little bit for those who don't know what depersonalization means?
so depersonalization is, I wouldn't say almost an out of body, like you're seeing a scenario happening that you don't like it. So it's happening, like it's like you're dreaming, but you're awake and you can drive and you can see whatever's happening, but something is playing out.
Right.
And when I snap out of it, I have no idea what it was. And I really believe that it's your body's way of protecting you from something maybe you don't remember. And I don't know to this day what that is, you
Right.
know. But the interesting thing is that when my dad died, my depersonalization stopped. The day he died, my depersonalization stopped. I had 2 years of it. And, it makes me
Wow.
question really, like, what is it that my dad, about my dad? I mean, like, I can't help but say, was I sexually abused? But I don't think
Right.
I was because I have a very strong memory. So I don't think I was. I mean,
Right.
I'm 99% sure that my dad did not sexually abuse me. But what did
Right.
he do? Or what is it that my body's not able to let me or is protecting me from remembering? You
Right.
know,
Right.
um, and so I had that actually until my dad died. So that was something that made me realize, okay, this is obviously linked to my dad. And
Right.
from that, it ended up going into panic attacks. And I think panic attacks, the definition of panic attacks is so broad. Like, I think we all experience something that science or medicine calls it panic attacks, but I think it's really different for everybody. And for
Right.
me, it was just a major rapid heart racing and just like, you know, when you are riding a roller coaster and your stomach drops or your
Yeah.
heart drops, you know, I
Yeah.
felt that constantly, you know, a heart racing,
Oof.
my heart dropping to my stomach kind of thing. And it was constant, you know, when I would have the
Mm.
attack.
Mhm.
And it was very hard to live with, you know.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
then that kind of went to this place where it was a very dark place. And I'm not sure I can explain what happened because I actually don't have a lot of recollection. But what ended up happening is I couldn't be alone because I was petrified to be alone.
Oh,
For
wow.
lack of a better word, the boogeyman was going to get me. I mean, even in
Right.
the shower, I couldn't step out of the shower without looking behind my shoulder. Like I was
Oh.
petrified, you know. And I'm a really strong person. Like, I mean, I can
Yeah.
handle 6 kids and life, and I'm very hyper, as my husband will define me. You know, like I have a lot of energy and nothing stops me. So for this to, I mean, it rocked our family, you know, and what ended up
Mm.
happening is I was actually going to work with my husband, and he's audiologist. And so I would go to the clinic and work with him for maybe a couple of hours, and then I would end up going to the back room and sleeping until my kids came from school and picked me up and took me home.
Mm.
And my husband would come, and so this went on for months. Like this went on for months. And at some point I would even have my friends pick me up and they would babysit me. And when I would wake up, I would just start crying out of fear. And they would
Mm.
have to let me know, you know. So it was a very dark period. I mean, I'd say from October till February. And then in
Mhm.
February I ended up having a seizure.
Mm.
And no explanation at all. You know, they did all the testing, and my therapist really believes that that was kind of when my body was like, look, you got to stop. You got to do something here, you
It's
know?
like, lady, you're not
And
paying attention. Hello.
no, exactly. You know, and
Yeah.
despite the anxiety and despite all the stuff, I mean, I was on a lot of medication, but it wasn't what my body needed.
Right.
I needed to deal with it, you know. And
Right.
I was already going to counseling at this point, but I had to deal with issues head on. And it was a really hard thing to do. You know, it was
Mm.
really, really hard. Rape is rape is life changing. And I know that
Yeah.
sounds like it's a simple sentence, but it's life changing. Like
Yeah.
you're never innocent again. You're always going to look over your shoulder. You're always going to have that hyper awareness when you're somewhere, you know, even in my own home.
Mhm.
And this has gotten better with time, but even in my own home, when I'm alone, I make sure everything's locked, you know,
Mm.
and when I
Mhm.
know the boys have left and I forget to lock the door, I still look over my shoulder. And it's gotten better with time. Like I've had to work through this. So like right now I can tell you that I'm so much better than I was 3 years ago, you
Mhm.
know. And part of it is talking myself through and saying, am I safe in this moment? Yes. Do I really need to look over my shoulder? And it's teaching myself, no, you don't. So don't do it. Don't give in to it. You know, it's one of those things that's so hard, but
Right.
I want to win this, right? Like I don't want my rapist to win.
Right.
And I mean, he's gone on with his life, you know.
Right.
So for me, it's learning to overcome. And after my seizure, I couldn't be left alone. Like partly because of my seizure, I couldn't drive for 6 months, and my kids ended up babysitting me.
Mhm.
And it was a very dark, dark, dark period
Yeah.
just for our family. And interestingly enough, it was 1 year from my seizure that my mom became very sick and she had pulmonary fibrosis, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And toward the end of her life, a year from my seizure, February, I needed to live with her in Maryland and take care of her for like at the end of her time. And it's
Mhm.
interesting again how God works because my last panic attack happened the anniversary of my 1 year seizure.
Mm.
And I haven't had one since, you
Right.
know, and I was able to be with my mom. It wasn't easy, you know,
Mhm.
even to this day, I still struggle. And I have my medication that I have to be on. And I call it my crazy pill. And the reason I call it my crazy pill is because without it, I feel crazy. And I
Mhm.
know that's not probably a politically correct term to
Correct
use,
term, but yeah.
but it's me. Like my other friend calls it her happy pill. You know,
Mhm.
I was saying to my kids, oh, can you remind me? I got to go renew my prescription. And my poor baby said, shouldn't you have backup? And I mean, it broke my heart hearing him say that because they
Yeah.
went through a lot too, you know.
Right.
And I'm diabetic, and just like I need to have medication for my diabetes, I have to have medication for my mental health, for my
Right.
well-being. And even that was a journey for me to accept, you know.
Right.
But to be the best me that I can be, I have to take my medication. And
Right.
I think as a society, if we can make this accessible to everybody, you know, if we can make the cost of medication not as ridiculous as it is, or people that have insurance, or, you know,
Right.
I mean, I just think that mental health is something that we need to tackle head on, like we do with, you know, drugs and all that kind of stuff. You know, with
Right.
mental health, if we're dealing with it, we wouldn't have some of the other problems that we have.
Right.
So my encouragement is that, you know, if you're struggling, first of all, you're not alone. You know,
Yeah.
seek somebody out. Seek somebody out that you trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to highlight something that you said, and when you said that you were going through a very dark time, and your son said, "Shouldn't you have backup?" And you thought to yourself, poor thing, they went through something too. Mental illness is not just about the one person, because it affects everyone that is around that
That's
person,
everyone.
because depending on the proximity, there's, we tend to lash out to those who are closest to us without realizing, or not even meaning to, but because we feel safest with them,
For
or they're
sure.
closest to us, they get the brunt
For
of
sure.
it, because then we know that we can't act like that with company, right? We
Exactly.
can't act like that with
Exactly.
other people, but
No,
when we're home in the safe space, we can be okay,
we can
right?
lash out. Yeah. Yeah. Another thing is that I think dealing with mental health is really hard for males over females to some degree, because
Hmm.
I feel like males feel like they need to be stronger. And I think that that's something that I like to think my kids have learned, you know, that mental health, some of it is genetic. And, you know, I have a couple of sons that have had to learn that depression or anxiety, it's hereditary, and there's nothing
Hmm.
wrong with it. And
Right.
you're a better person to seek help with that. You know, and we
Absolutely.
have to talk about that in our family. And being on medication, it's like eating your vegetables for some people, right?
Right. Right.
You just have to do it. You have to do
Right.
it. And, you know, I think that being open and talking about this, especially for my boys, has made them better people. And we've all grown as a family through it and
Yeah.
continue to.
That's awesome. So here's a question. So I think that you wrote in the book that you believe that your father had some mental illness, right?
Yeah.
But it was
Mm-hmm.
never really diagnosed because he never would go to the doctor,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Yep.
is it possible you think that that is something that you acquired through him?
For
Um,
sure. For sure.
yeah, and not
Yeah.
just the way that he was, but just genetically as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It runs in his family. But, you know, I mean, he's from India. How many
Hmm.
generations that it just goes undiagnosed, right? Like you might think,
Hmm.
you know, a lot of times people leave home and it's just, oh, he's they use the term crazy, you know,
Yeah.
because they don't know what else to call it, right?
Right. Right.
Yes, definitely it was definitely it's strong on my dad's family for sure. I mean, he's had siblings. But you know, I mean, it breaks my heart because I think what a much richer life my dad could have had, as well as us as children, had he sought help.
Yes.
You know, I mean, one of his diagnoses for sure is bipolar
Mm.
disorder, but I do believe he had other issues. But you know, I mean, my brothers and I see certain things in ourselves. You know,
Hmm.
he's very obsessive compulsive, and we see that in ourselves very much
Mm.
so. You know, and so yes, to your question is yes for sure. My dad, genetics is a strong thing. You know, and it can be a
Yeah.
very positive thing. You know, my dad's negative traits, had he sought help, could be very positive. You
Yeah.
know, like his OCD things really could have been a very positive thing in his work and his, you know, how he basically used it, how he
conducted.
managed it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
yeah. So yes, for sure, to your question.
Yeah. So, when it's important, just not just for you, but it's important for everybody that's around you as well. So you touched upon a little bit upon the police.
Yeah.
Ugh. We have this thing, the things that are bubbling up now that are showing up
Mm-hmm.
more and
Mm-hmm.
more in terms of the police and how they treat minority people, not marginalized people. And when you wrote about that in your book, I was like, oh my God, I totally get it. Like, why would you call the police ever? Why? Because
Right.
sometimes, sometimes as a Black person, I think to myself, I would do everything that I could before calling the police, because to me, I always feel like that would be escalating the problem versus diffusing the problem. So, and you write about it in your book, but could you tell us a little bit about why you hesitated to call the police, especially after you were raped?
So our experience with the police was a little different. I mean, so they kind of took my dad's side.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't really a racist thing. It was more, women, or our spouses, or they chose not to help us. And that particular time when I called the police, my dad had just finished beating my mom black and blue and said he was going to kill us. And I called the police to let them know that we need help. And by the time the police did come, my dad had calmed down a bit, but they questioned us. But at the same time, even though they saw my mom's black and blue leg, they were sitting at the table. The police was sitting at the table, and in the end, we're just having conversation with him like he was fine. They didn't charge him. They did absolutely nothing. And over time, my dad and the officer would wave to each other when they passed each other on the road, driving past each other.
Right.
And I just didn't see that as, first of all, it was my word against my pastor's. But at the same time, I had my panties that had a semen on it. So there's a big part of me that wishes I had done it, but I don't think I think, I mean, as I'm talking to you, I'm saying this, but I don't know that I would have had the emotional support of my parents at that moment too. Right. I'm not sure what they would have said,
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they would have not, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I was very alone, so it wasn't just the police, it was the community. It was,
right.
My mom did everything for us. She did the best she could that she knew how. And so I don't blame her, but she was also emotionally absent sometimes. Right. Life was so heavy for her that I don't know what she would have done with that. Yeah. I just didn't see the police as being safe. I didn't see our community as being safe. I didn't do anything. One of my biggest regrets, and something that I don't talk about in the book that just is so infuriating to me, because I actually was just writing a blog post about this, is the statute of limitation in the States is just ridiculous. In Canada, we don't have statute of limitation on rape, and I don't understand why there is, period. I was reading, I think it's Minnesota has a 3-year statute of limitation. And let me tell you something, if you're a rape victim, it takes a lot longer, especially a young person, to do anything. I mean, some people do something right away, given, but I don't believe there should be a statute of limitation on rape. And for me, when I was older and looked into it, at that time in Ohio, the statute of limitation was 9 years. And I just missed it by a year.
Wow.
And it was just so frustrating for me, That has changed. I think it's a little longer now, but I don't know. It's just so frustrating.
Right. Yeah. So it kind of goes back, you're talking about your dad waving to the police. It kind of goes back to that good old boys kind of network thing where it's like, oh yeah, he's doing that, but he has his reasons. And so we're not going to, bother with that. I'm totally with you on that statute of limitations thing. I did not realize that the statute of limitations could be so short, especially like you said, it can take a while before someone can come to terms with what has happened and how they're feeling about it, and then say, okay, you know what, I really need to report this or do something about it. And
Yeah, for sure.
again, it's something that mostly affects women. And so you have to think that those things that mostly affect women take longer to adjust than those things that mostly affect men, and to accept as well.
Sure.
Something as simple as birth control. Yes, we're going to create this pill so that men can get it up, but we're going to take our time creating something for women not to. It's just those types of things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
It's very frustrating. It's still a main-dominated world, Like, I mean,
right.
We're
The
making
patriarchy
changes,
is strong. The patriarchy is strong.
Exactly.
But,
It is
I mean,
strong.
the more people share their stories like you have, the more people push against it, then people have to listen. Eventually, people have to listen and have to go, okay, yeah, maybe this needs to be looked at. Maybe this needs to be changed. This doesn't make any sense, all these different things. And so I think, like I said before, that's what our stories are for. Our stories are for helping make a difference, right? Helping make a difference.
For sure. For sure.
Honestly, I have to say that, in reading your book, I never felt that you were weak in this book. I never felt, I mean, I knew you were going through something really hard. That was clear. And I think, I feel, I think that you go through the emotions that any normal person would go through who's going through so much. But I never felt that you were like completely ready to just throw in the towel and just say, you know what, screw this. I can't do it. Let's we're not doing this, and just succumb to whatever came once you said whatever, so for that, I think that that's what makes it such a beautiful read, because everybody's on your side, and reading the book, everybody's kind of on your side. You're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Oh my gosh, no. Oh my gosh, please, and we want you to win. We want you to win. And I think that you did. And I really appreciate the way that you ended the book. It was beautiful, the way that you closed it out, because it allowed us to know that everything is going to be ongoing. Things are ongoing. Taking care of your mental health is an ongoing thing, but you can find moments where you will then overcome certain things, and then you can move on to the next thing, which is absolutely beautiful.
There's a lot of freedom in forgiveness too. And I think that for my mom, my journey with my mom was one of acceptance and forgiveness. And forgiveness is kind of a strong word, but just realizing that she did the best she could do with the skills she had in her maybe toolbox. And even my rapist, like, I get asked all the time, have you forgiven him? And I have, but it's taken it's been a journey to do so. I mean, I have a strong faith, and I mean, if I were him, I would be petrified of God, because ultimately vengeance is his, and one of the things that I've learned is, like, it's okay to be angry, but for me, it was also holding me back from healing. I'm never, more than likely, I'm never going to get the apology that I really, really wanted from him.
Right.
And that kind of, I believe that kind of stalled my healing, whereas acceptance of, like, okay, well, this is really not on me. Through counseling, I've had to learn to be gentle with my younger self. And that was something that I have taken years to do,
Right. Right.
To be gentle with her and not forgive her, because I don't think the younger me needed forgiveness, but just understanding because I held her accountable. I just wish like, oh, you should have, in different
Yeah.
situations done this or that, or, and if I can leave people with this about my book is it's not a happily ever after
No.
we've ridden into the sunset. It doesn't work that way.
No.
It's
No.
it's my happily ever after that's ongoing,
Right. Yeah, and I think you do a good job of relaying that in the book, that
Yeah.
it's still ongoing, but it's a work in progress. We're all a work in
Yeah.
progress. And so
Yeah.
I think that you do a beautiful job of making sure that comes through. It comes through in the book.
Thank you.
Yeah, you did a beautiful job, and I think it's helpful for a lot of people to read it and to actually see, like you said, they're not alone. Mental health is really important, and it's important to listen to your body. It's important to listen to what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
with your
Mm-hmm.
body and with the things that you're doing. And if they just don't feel right, if something just doesn't feel right, then you really got to think about it and get the help that you need for that. I do
That's
agree.
right. Pay attention.
Yeah, and I do agree. It's ridiculously expensive for a lot of people. And so mental health is not something that people are going to say, okay, I need to go see a counselor, just like I need to
Yeah.
go see the gynecologist every year, and I need to go see,
Yeah.
my physician every year. And, I mean, we put those things off all the time. So
Right.
mental health is
True.
always going to be at the bottom, right? It's
It's
like if we
true.
don't
It's true.
have to go to the dentist, we're not going to go every 6 months, especially if we don't have
No,
insurance, right? So
exactly.
so those are things that are always going to be put to the bottom, where it's incredible to me because your mental health is so important just for day to day, right?
For sure. I think as moms, that's something that we do also. We always put ourselves last, and I mean, if our kids needed counseling or if our kids were raped or if our kids were suffering from, we would find a way to help them. Most people would find a
Absolutely.
way to help them, and I think that what I've learned is I have to put, in some ways, I have to put myself higher up on that list so that if I'm healthy, I can help my people, help my kids, help my husband, be there. Whereas if I'm not emotionally well, it's very hard for me to do that.
Right. Then you're pouring from an empty cup.
That's right.
Absolutely. And it's so true. It's something that happens to us naturally. I think it's something that we're socialized in a way to just believe that once we get married, now we have to put our husbands first. Then we have children. Then we have to put the kids first, then the husband, then us. And so it's like,
Yeah.
have you eaten? Have you eaten?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a little bit left over. I'll eat now. Right. And you
Right.
go to the
Exactly.
store. What's the first thing you do? Oh, you see something and like, oh, you know what? Zia needed some socks. Let me go get her some socks.
That's
Oh my
right.
gosh, Travis needed some underwear. Let me get him some underwear. Then you get home and you put on your holy underwear and your two mismatched socks
Yeah.
because it's just because
It's so true.
you haven't even thought about what you need. And if you do think about what you need, you're like, oh my gosh, look at these underwear. They're 5 for $10. I'm gonna. Oh, can I
so
spend that much on myself? Right? Do you
That
think
is
I can
so
spend that much
true.
on myself? But you've already spent like, $50 on everybody else. And
So
then you're like,
true.
oh,
Yeah.
it's an extra $10. So, it's like,
Should I do it? Yeah.
we're
So true.
all,
It's so true.
but it's so important to actively and intentionally put ourselves first sometimes so that we can actually
Yeah.
not feel resentment, not feel frustration, not feel anger, not feel,
Sure.
all these things that can come up that you'll feel towards your family, and they have nothing to do with it. It's all you. You're the one doing it, right?
It's
So
true.
it's so
It's
important.
true. Yes.
It's so
Yeah.
important.
Agree.
So, is there anything that you would like to share that I haven't asked about or that we haven't, touched upon, but that you would really like to share with the audience?
I mean, I think what I would like to leave is that if you are hurting, if you are broken, you're not alone. I think that's the one thing that I want my book to come across, is that you're not alone. We all have something that's broken. And it takes a lot of strength to seek help, and I'm not talking necessarily counseling. I'm talking about sharing with somebody, someone you trust,
Right.
especially with abuse, whether it's sexual, physical, emotional. You're not alone. And, the one thing that I love is that I chose my title, Beautifully Broken, is because we're all broken in some way, but it's like a stained glass. You can still put all these broken pieces together and still something amazing, that you never
Absolutely.
thought would be possible. And, I'm beautifully broken, and my life, it will continue that way, but just don't give up. You just got to put that foot in front of the other. And sometimes for me, sometimes it literally was that hour. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I can do this hour, or be honest. And sometimes I call my husband and say, I'm really struggling. I don't think I can do supper tonight, or I don't think I can do whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think the key to the baby step is to tell somebody if you're struggling, even your doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Wow. Well, it's I agree with you. I agree. So my last question that I ask all of my guests is, what is your favorite dish? Because of course this is diversity dish and we have to talk about dishing a little bit.
Oh.
So what is your favorite dish?
As in food,
Yeah.
chicken curry.
What is
I
that?
make chicken curry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, chicken curry with some coconut rice.
Yeah.
It's our family favorite. I can never make enough. If you can imagine, 7 boys, 7 men.
Yes.
Yes. So we love chicken curry with some coconut rice. It's our go-to meal.
I love it. I love
What's
it.
yours?
You know what? You give me anything that's made with potatoes,
Oh.
I'm a happy camper. I'm a
Oh,
happy
nice.
camper. I
Yes.
love
Yes.
potatoes, however you make them.
Oh, you're making me hungry.
I know, that's what happens. Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you opening up and sharing your story, because I think that it is so important to do that. I love your book. I'm, like I said, I'm gonna link it in the show notes. Make sure everybody has an opportunity to read it. It's an easy read in that it just moves so quickly in terms of you get engrossed in the story. It's less than 200 pages, but it is really it's just a really strong story that I think everyone could benefit from. I will also link in the show notes some information for ways to people to find mental health help at a lower cost. I think I have some information for that, but I think, yeah, because we talked about the cost of it, and it is costly. But I think that there are a lot of nonprofits right now that are working to make it more accessible for everyone. And so I want to link some of those things in the show notes as well. So thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Sadie. It was lovely to see your face. Sending you a hug.
Hey, did you enjoy that episode? If so, please be sure to subscribe, download, rate, review, and share. It would also mean the world to me if you became a patron over at Patreon. The information is in the show notes. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.